Awakened Living is a 21st century movement for people who consider themselves spiritual but not religious, who have a deep hunger for connected community and a divine impulse for personal and global transformation. Our mission is to encourage and inspire the awakening of human consciousness. Good evening. Welcome to Awakened Living Television. My name is TJ Woodward. I'm the Minister and Spiritual Director of Awakened Living in San Francisco and the host of your show. I'm really excited about this evening's show. We have Alison Crair on the show. She's a wellness coach and a recovery counselor. I'm going to let her introduce herself to give her exact credentials. She's someone that I've met recently, and I just love being in conversation with her about recovery, about wellness, about really building a foundation for the life of your dreams. So, Alison, I'm so grateful you're here.
Hi, thank you.
We met through our common friend, Dr. Bridget Lank, who I love.
Right, she's
and
amazing.
She just, when she introduced us, you should be on the show. And I love that you said yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you for being here. Before we get into the conversation, I would love it if you could take a few minutes to introduce yourself to our viewers and let them know a little bit. You'll get, what you do correct. I think I got it close, but let them know who you are and what you do.
Okay, great. Hi, I'm Alison Crair. I'm a life, wellness, and recovery counselor and coach. I'm also a mindful eating coach and workshop facilitator here in San Francisco and Marin.
Okay, great. Well, I'm curious about what mindful eating is. Let's start there if you'd be willing to.
Wow. Okay, so mindfulness is a big word right now. Everybody's into it and learning about what it is. And what I see in my practice is a lot of people who have addictions and going through life events, primarily women, but men as well. The issue of food always comes up. It's always used as a coping mechanism, whether or not you're tired or you're stressed or you're lonely. Food is always your friend. And so I really got interested in what, having been someone who has always dieted, yo-yo dieted, either on a diet, off a diet, good, bad, whatever, really learning more about different tools and ways that people can find peace around the food. So mindfulness really is just that. You become more mindful about what your body truly needs and what different needs are not being addressed, and then finding ways to fill those needs without using food to fill those needs.
Wow. Well, thank you for that. And I know that you and I talked about, are you hungry, as a question.
Right.
And I wonder if you could speak a little bit about that in terms of the mindfulness, being really aware, because I think so many of us, whether we call it an addiction or a disorder or just our culture, really where it feels like we're constantly feeding ourselves or constantly, it's like there's this big hunger for something in our culture even.
Right. Well, I think, there's so much study that's been done about the addictive nature of food, first off. So that's a real thing. They've done studies with sugar and, illicit drugs and how the rats will go for the sugar and keep going back. So that's a real thing. But as far as where mindfulness comes in and what people are doing with that is, if you're going to the refrigerator and you're not hungry, what you need's not in there. So I just help people figure out what that need is.
Wow. So tell me about wellness coaching, because I know that you and I have talked about when someone, whether it's someone coming into recovery for an eating disorder, or addiction of any kind, or just really wanting to maybe get back on track or need some extra support in their life, like what do you think is the primary foundation? Because I know you talk a lot about self-care and how to really establish a foundation for living before we maybe even start to address some of the addiction issues.
Right. So what I'm really seeing in my practice, and this is, I do recovery coaching for people in recovery from drugs and alcohol, but I also help people who are, had a big life event or any transitional kind of thing. So what keeps coming up, though, is the inability to implement self-care. So wellness coaching really addresses those kind of things, like your basic foundation of self-care, exercise, nutrition, rest, getting those really online and people understanding how to do that. And I can spend weeks and weeks on just implementing those and getting that into more of a habit and something that someone enjoys doing. That's not, when I talk about exercise, it's not, let's go out and train for a marathon. It's more like basic, let's walk for 20 minutes, let's walk for 10 minutes, whatever that person is able to do in that moment, and how that really can raise somebody's endorphins and get them kind of feeling better. And then as far as nutrition, it's just basic stuff, like what to choose at the grocery store, what to have, what to cook, really, basic things. So then we can talk to your treatment team or your therapist or even just start implementing things on top of that. So you do have a solid foundation to be able to carry on with those things and to really get well, and then to find peace and live how you want to live.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. So who do you work with? Like, how would anyone who's watching our show, how would they know maybe that they could use your services, or what might they expect when they meet with you?
Right. Well, we were talking about like what wellness coaching is before, and about that. But I work with anyone. I work with people that have addictions. I work with people that are housewives and their kids are going to college. I work with really anyone. And what they would expect would be just that support, and how important that support is.
Yeah, it's so interesting, because I find that all of us at some point in our life could use that extra support. And sometimes it's not only not easy to identify when I might want or need support, but really then even knowing where that support might be, because we know there's like a lot of different support groups out there. But how does a person that just is, maybe there is a big transition, kids leave for college, there's that empty nest syndrome, or any major life event that might either be traumatic or just life changing.
Yeah. And I think people don't understand how much they need help.
Yeah.
And if you look at it kind of on a scientific level, which I always think really helps people, because so many people want to think that, or they'll think that they're weak. They can't stay on a diet because they're weak, or they can't they can't get through a breakup because they're weak. But when you really look at the scientific evidence around what it takes to implement a new habit, or overcome something that you've been doing constantly, everybody is super excited, and you start a program, the beginning of the year is a perfect example, and 5 days into it, even 3 days into it, you've kind of lost your steam and you can't do it. But when you know that that's coming, to really implement that support to help you get to 30 days, and knowing that that's what happens to everyone does that, so picking one thing at a time. I'm gonna be better about getting out of the house in the morning when I get up, and implementing that as a new habit, and all of the things that as far as balance and wellness that just those small changes can make. But having the support around that, whether or not it's talking to me every day. I call a lot of my clients like, hey, were you able to get, and there's no judgment around it, because it's hard for everyone.
Yeah. Thank you for that, because I think that there's a lot of us that I know I have in many different times in my life fallen into that category where I just have like, I should be able to do this alone.
I still do, yeah.
Yeah, and like weight loss, or for me it'd be more like wanting to build, wanting to get back to the gym and wanting to, and then just like you said, 2 or 3 days into it, it's kind of like, but just that extra support piece. I worked with a coach some time back when I really was looking to get my career right on track with what I wanted, and it started with us very clearly setting intentions and then having like very specific measurable tasks each week. But the support piece was great because, like you said, there was no judgment from him. He's such a gentle, amazing person.
Right.
But I knew every Friday I was going to email him with how many things that I do on my 10 action items.
Right.
And it motivated me. Even if I was the hour before the email went out, I had to hurry and do them. And it changed my life. It changed my life just having that extra support piece.
But also, and knowing that you're not alone in this, that it's not, you know, as human beings, we're wired a certain way. Your habits that you developed as a kid are still kind of lurking around there. If you went home from school every day and had a Velveeta sandwich and that was your deal for, you know, 4 years or whatever, that habit is still there, you know. And so you're really fighting against nature and everything. So support is crucial. And when you're talking about somebody with an addiction, it's even compounded further.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in Indiana, so I did have the Velveeta sandwich on Wonder Bread
Exactly.
and a bag of Fritos and a soda. I did that every day, basically.
Yeah.
So yeah, the topic of habits, it seems to be up a lot. I was listening to this great show on NPR, and they were talking about what it takes to develop habits. And I don't know if you probably have more statistical information, but I've heard at least 21 days of doing something very, very consistently before it becomes even remotely a habit. And I'm wondering if you might be able to expand upon that, or even your experience with your clients.
Yeah, well, I think that, you know, 21 days minimum, and I think that depends on what habit that is.
Yeah.
You know, and if you have, if you're an experienced person in creating new habits, because that also is a muscle. It's like, okay, I know I'm going to be uncomfortable. I know I'm going to need to replace something, versus somebody that's been, you know, using drugs and alcohol in a maladaptive coping way, that they have. That's also a habit. It's an addiction for sure, but it's also a habit, you know, and those triggers, and that's what that means. When someone says, are you triggered by something? It's like, is your habit, you know, reactivated? And so for somebody that's an addict or an alcoholic, or, you know, food or drugs or anything, usually it takes a lot longer. Yeah. And it takes a lot more support. You know, that's where like the 90-day kind of thing comes in. Something else may take a little bit less, but it's constant vigilance. Yeah. You know, I always say it's like guarding the gate. You know, you've got to really guard the gate if you want to move past it. You know.
Yeah, when I said 21 days, I was thinking, well, wouldn't it be great if it was just 21 days? What I'm reminded of is when I quit smoking, and what you were talking about with the triggers. I remember quitting smoking, and there's definitely a physical addiction to nicotine, and I could feel that kind of leaving my body at a certain point. I mean, I remember kind of starting to feel more alive, or like I could breathe again, or like I wasn't, because I remember just being exhausted. And then once that cleared, it was all about those habits. I remember the phone would ring, and this was back in the day when the phone was in a stationary place, and I would sit in the chair and answer the phone, and I would reach for a cigarette. I didn't even know I was doing it. Right. Like, it was so unconscious that, like, I associated just about everything with a cigarette. As soon as I'd get in my car, I literally would get my car started and reach for the window to crack it a little bit so I could light my cigarette. And
you were just rolling.
I was rolling, but that's how long ago it was. So the support is crucial. You know, and you know, I had a group of friends that were supporting me, but what a gift it would be to have someone like you that I could have, you know, in those moments.
Yeah. Well, and knowing that that's what's going to come up, being prepared for those thoughts and feelings, and being, okay, this is what she was talking about. This is when that happens. But isn't it interesting? I don't know about you, but when I quit smoking, like, I loved smoking, and I just didn't want to end up in the hospital, you know. So, but even now, you know, and I've moved way past that and done triathlons, and, you know, I'm way past smoking. But I still have triggers to it, you know, like going and sitting in the backyard and everything. I'm like, wow, wouldn't that be nice to have a cigarette? You know, I mean, it's like, it's in there. So, you know, given the right circumstances, if you're not careful, anything can get too big.
Yeah. And One thing that I'm reminded of, or as you were speaking, I was thinking, and I want to be careful how I say this. I don't want to say it's easy, but when we quit drugs or alcohol or cigarettes, there's certain habits or certain addictions, if you classify it as an addiction. I recognize for some people it is, for some people it isn't. I mean, I know plenty of people who have chosen to quit drinking that never felt they reached full addiction, but they just wanted to curb before it got trouble. But what about those things that you can't give up 100%? And I think about food because, it's not that simple. You can't just stop eating, obviously. And I'm bringing it back maybe to the mindfulness and the mindful eating, because talk about a trigger and a habit. Not only at the end of the day do I have the Velveeta sandwich, but it's Velveeta that's the habit. Like the diet that I was raised around, I had to completely unlearn that.
Yeah.
And growing up in Indiana and the time I didn't know what arugula was. I didn't know anything healthy.
Right.
So when someone comes to you that really needs kind of like a whole new structure, a whole new way of being, where do you begin with someone? Like if someone comes and says, my eating habits are completely out of control and I don't know what to do. Like, where would you begin with that?
Well, I think I would probably begin with where do you want to be?
Yeah.
And eating is a tricky one. There's a lot of things wrapped up in eating. And a lot of people that struggle with it, it's an emotion, emotional eating is almost, something you see on the front of a magazine. It's really well known. But I would say you start really slowly. It's, you start with, the Am I Hungry program that was developed by a doctor. Her name is Michelle May. That question alone, am I hungry, was a huge eye-opener for me, because it's dinner time, so you should eat. It's lunchtime, and going back to that intuitive eating thing that we did have as a child, that you see, or even like your pet, you can see your pet intuitively eats. But going back to that and just saying, for just this week, when you go to eat, ask yourself, are you hungry?
Yeah.
And you can, if you choose to eat, even if you're not hungry, that's a choice, and go for it, whatever. But if you're not hungry and you're looking for food, then there's a need that needs to be met. Yeah. And so the mindfulness of dropping in of what is that need? Am I lonely? Am I hungry? Am I angry? Or what needs to be addressed? And then we can talk about ways to build that support there.
Yeah.
So if you're lonely, then maybe it is that you need to start calling your friends in the afternoon. Whatever is your magic hours for a lot of people. Some people it's just all day. They just graze all day, so they can't remember the last time they were actually hungry. And what are your natural body cues for that? What does being hungry really feel like? You get a stomach ache, or you get lightheaded, or what are those things?
Wow, that's really powerful. I never really thought about it in that way, to think that with some of the habitual eating, some of us may have never been hungry for like the last 15 years.
Well,
we don't let ourselves even get to that point.
Well, and that's been, the whole diet culture. And my feeling is, I've always been a dieter, one diet or another. But you know what? If diets worked, everybody would be thin and we'd be on our way, right? But they don't, because it's that restrictive mentality. You restrict and then you overeat. You restrict when you're on your diet, and then you go off your diet, and then you're overeating, and then you're going. So that pendulum is going back and forth. So that's a really big visual cue to use, is the pendulum, like one way or the other. And mindful eating is more about having the center be, there's going to be times where you are going to overeat and times that you probably undereat, but it's never so drastic one way or the other to send you into some kind of emotional tailspin.
Well, and what I'd love to explore is just to go a little bit deeper with one thing that you said, that because I love the question, am I hungry? I mean, that can be revolutionary. So once I'm practicing that for a while, and when I get to the point, as you said, when I say, wow, I'm not hungry, but I still have this incredible urge to eat, it maybe more than hunger, like that emotional need. to that mindfulness piece of what's really going on with me, what's happening in my body, what's happening emotionally. I often, when I work with clients, I'll have them have a card with them, an index card, and just in that moment, if it's food that's the issue, if they're not hungry but wanting to eat anyway, just to pause for a moment and write down, where am I at physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually?
Right.
And to begin to kind of track that, but really more about being aware of what's my emotional nature that's happening here, what are my thoughts that are preceding this next urge for whatever it is. And so when someone gets to that point, when we're mindful enough to recognize, wow, I'm eating when I'm not hungry, and I really see that. Once I have the mindfulness piece, the awareness around what's happening, I'm seeing that I'm really am emotional eating. I feel sad, I feel lonely, I feel afraid, and so I'm going to eat this whatever it is to try to soothe that. What's next then? What do we do with that then? Like, how do you work with someone at that point?
Well, the program that I do goes through all of those stages. Okay. So by the time you're finished with the 8 weeks, whether or not we do it one-on-one or in a workshop, by the time you get through to the end, you really are armed with tools to figure that out. And you're not going to be cured, and you're not going to, right in 8 weeks or in that short amount of time. I mean, this is a big thing. Yeah. But what you will have is, through journaling, through developing lists of things that you're willing to do, and that's what it's all about. Like me helping you to determine what you are willing to do. Yeah. Are you willing to, when you have an urge to eat and you're not hungry, are you willing to walk around the block? Can you walk around the block? Some people are not even able to do that. So what are you willing to do? And helping them channel that energy into those more positive places. Are you willing to pick up the phone? I do this with my recovery clients, where I can give them a toolbox, and which I call all the time. Here's your toolbox. It's got a phone in it. It's got a sometimes a big book in it. It's got a smart whatever the tools are, and a magic wand. But you've got to open it up, take out the magic wand, and use it, including, I've got to actually call somebody, and a lot of times they're not really willing to do that. Initially, they'll say, oh, yeah, I'll do everything. Right. But you have to really, really want it. Yeah. So that's the thing. But sometimes even knowing that, like, we put together your whole program with you doing it, and you weren't able to do it, so let's scale that back. Let's make it so that we meet more often, or that we talk on the phone every day, or whatever support people need to get through that initial thing.
Well, I want to bring up something that I was going to say could be controversial, but I know it's not. But there seems to be, in some circles around recovery, there's a couple of different ways to approach things. I mean, I know there's an infinite number of ways to approach anything, but there seem to be almost two camps in the world. If one is seeing something that's broken that needs to be fixed, and maybe it might include some guilt. I'm using that as a motivating factor, like do better, and a little bit of that pushing. And then there's really working with let's look at what is working. Let's affirm the positive. Let's continue to work toward what is working for you. I have a sense, I know where you land on that, but what's your experience, if you're willing to share, in how those two work, in negative consequences, positive consequences, what really helps someone when, like, let's say I am at that 5-day, 6-day mark, and I'm sitting, I'm like, Alison told me to take out my magic wand, but I don't feel like taking out my magic wand right now. So what works? What works at that point?
So I think that was kind of like two questions, right?
Oh yeah, I'm sure at least. So there could be many.
Were you talking about like traditional recovery paradigms versus like harm reduction?
No, well, traditional recovery. I guess it's like, is it effective to look at what's not working and try to fix it, or is it more effective to look at what is working and build on that? So strengths building rather than looking at like character defect model, like there's something wrong here.
Well, I think my take on that is that there's always things that aren't working. It's not that you aren't okay. Yeah. And that's, if that's what you mean. Yeah. It's not like whatever you've learned to help you get from one place to the other is not working.
Yeah.
And we all develop those things. And, you know, let's face it, a lot of people who suffer from a lot of this stuff have had backgrounds that have been really challenging, and have needed things to get them through, and that at one point they worked. I mean, drugs and alcohol work great in the beginning, and they work until they don't anymore. So for someone to say, you know, you're bad, and, you know, nobody's bad. It's just that you either have a disease or you have learned a behavior which is comforting, and now it's not healthy for you, and we need to kind of unlearn that and build that up. So for sure it's things that are not working. Otherwise you wouldn't be, you know, if everything was working, you'd be fine
on your own.
But I would say everybody's got stuff that's not working that they continue to do, you know, that they...
Well, thank you for that distinction, because that really is where I was going with the heart of it, of like the difference between guilt and shame is guilt is I've done something wrong, and shame is I am wrong, or a sense of there's something inherently wrong with me. And I also love that you talked about drugs and alcohol really working well. You know, when I reframed in my own life and in working with clients, when I reframed what we might call coping mechanisms, which has a little bit of a negative connotation, I mean, and then I reframed that to brilliant strategies. Like, they were really brilliant strategies at the moment that really helped you to feel safe, to help you to deal with whatever was happening. And they've just become, as we say, maladaptive. Like, they no longer work the way they once did.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's complex. I mean, you know, we're doing a brushstroke, and a lot of these words are thrown around so easily now, you know, like they're all over the place. And what do they actually mean, and in real time, and all of that kind of stuff. So none of this stuff is easy. You know, I say to my clients a lot, you know, it's pretty simple, the process, but it's not easy. I mean, and especially in the beginning, it's hard, and that's where we come in. As far as, you know, and the spiritual piece is huge. It's really huge. But all of this is I just want people to feel better. You know, and to be at peace. Everybody wants peace and ease, and it doesn't matter where you come from, you know, where your walk of life, everybody wants the same thing. And they want to have peace and ease around what they do on a day-to-day basis.
Indeed. Well, you may not believe this, but we're actually out of time.
Oh my gosh.
So on our second show, part 2, I would love to, what came up for me that feels like we could still talk about would be, I'd love to hear about your own personal journey, because I find that the reason I'm in my work is my own personal journey around spirituality and spiritual kind of desperation at one point in my life. And then also to really delve into kind of the spirituality of addiction and the spirituality of recovery, if you're willing to do that in our second show. Well, great. So in closing for this show, why don't you take a few minutes and tell our viewers where to find you, your web information. I'd love to hear, you know, tell them about the 8-week program or anything else you want to share.
You can reach me at Alison, ALISON, at CrairCoaching.com, or you can phone me at 310-990-3539. And yes, it's an LA number.
Well, thank you, Alison, so much for being on the show. And thank you to our viewers for tuning in to be engaged in this conversation about living a life filled with wellness, filled with a foundation of a life that is built on, you know, just asking for help when we need it. You know, that if there's anything that I got out of this conversation is that any of us at any point in our life have at least periods in our life where we may need extra support. And what is it like to just say yes to that and to allow that in? So thank you again, Alison. What a great opportunity to talk about building a foundation for the life of our dreams. Please visit us online and attend one of our Awaken Living events. We have a wonderful Saturday morning authenticity group. We also meet on Sunday mornings, a morning filled with inspirational music. I do an inspirational talk, and we have a conversation about spirituality in the 21st century. You can find us online at awakenlivingsf.org. Thank you so much, and good night.